Galactic Council had witnessed the rise and fall of 10,000 civilizations. They had cataloged every known form of torture, every method of breaking a species' will to fight. But they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. When the War Crimes Tribunal sentenced the last human survivors to Kepler, 442c, they expected screams within the first solar cycle. The planet was a Class-3 Deathworld, a designation reserved for environments so hostile that even the Council's most hardened warriors lasted mere days before madness took them. The atmospheric pressure could crush bones. The gravity was 3 times galactic standard. Acid rain fell from skies torn by electromagnetic storms, while the ground itself seemed alive with burrowing predators whose very breath was toxic. The temperature swings could freeze blood solid at dawn and boil it by midday. It was the perfect prison, the perfect execution chamber dressed as exile. But as the Council's monitoring drones transmitted their first reports from the planet's surface, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the expected death screams echoing through their chambers, they heard something that made every alien counselor's blood run cold. Laughter. Human laughter, carried on winds that should have flayed flesh from bone. And at the center of it all stood a young human female, barely past her species' adolescence, teaching her fellow prisoners something the galaxy had forgotten was possible on a world like this. She was teaching them how to survive. But more terrifyingly, she was teaching them how to thrive. The transport ship's hull groaned as it descended through Kepler 442c's upper atmosphere, its reinforced plating straining against pressure differentials that had claimed 17 previous vessels. Inside the cramped prisoner bay, 43 humans sat in magnetic restraints, their faces bearing the hollow expressions of the condemned, all except one. 17-year-old Maya Chen pressed her face against the tiny viewport, her dark eyes reflecting the chaotic dance of lightning that split the alien sky. While her fellow prisoners wept or prayed to gods that seemed to have abandoned them, Maya watched the approaching surface with something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. First time seeing a Class-3 up close? Asked the grizzled man shackled beside her. Captain Rex Morrison had commanded Earth's 3rd Fleet before the surrender. Now his weathered hands trembled as another atmospheric shockwave rattled the ship. Maya nodded, never taking her eyes from the window. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And Morrison felt his blood chill at the genuine wonder in her voice. The Vorthak guard nearest them chittered in what might have been laughter. Its insectoid features twisted into something resembling a smile as it spoke through the universal translator. "Beautiful, human child? You will sing different songs when the bone melters find your scent. This world has consumed the mightiest galactic warriors. Your soft species will last perhaps 1 rotation before madness claims you." Maya turned from the viewport to face the 8-foot-tall creature. Where others might have shown fear, her expression held only polite curiosity. "How many rotations does 1 day equal on this planet?" The Vorthak's mandibles clicked in confusion. 37 standard hours. Why does this matter to dying meat? Just wanted to know how long I have to prove you wrong. The silence that followed her words was broken only by the screaming wind outside. Morrison stared at the girl who couldn't be more than 5 feet tall, wondering if the stress had finally snapped her mind. Around them, other prisoners began to pay attention to the exchange. Dr. Sarah Voss, formerly Earth's leading xenobiologist, leaned forward despite her restraints. "Maya, honey, I know this is scary, but you need to understand what we're facing down there." The preliminary scans showed atmospheric composition that's barely breathable. "The pressure alone will be manageable," Maya interrupted gently. "The gravity is 2.8 times Earth standard, which is challenging but not impossible." "My grandmother grew up in a mining colony at 2.2 times standard. The atmospheric pressure is equivalent to being 2 kilometers underwater, and the gas mixture," she paused, running calculations in her head. 32% oxygen, which is actually higher than Earth. "The sulfur compounds will be irritating but not immediately lethal if we can rig basic filtration." Dr. Voss blinked. "How do you possibly know all that?" "I read the tribunal records. They had to disclose the planetary data for the sentencing to be legal under galactic law." Maya's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing weather patterns. "Article 847.2 of the Prisoner Rights Convention. I also accessed the geological surveys from 2387 through the public database." The Vorthak guard had gone very still. "You studied this world?" "For 3 months while awaiting sentencing. I figured if they were going to send us here, I should probably learn everything I could about it." Maya shrugged as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Though I'll admit the data on the indigenous life forms is frustratingly incomplete, Morrison felt a spark of something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. What did you find? Maya's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a scholar sharing a favorite subject. Kepler 442c is classified as a Class OC. 3 Deathworld, primarily because of environmental hostility, not because life is impossible. The ecosystem is actually remarkably robust. The Council surveys identified over 400 distinct species, which suggests a complex food web. That means sources of nutrition if we can identify what's safe for human consumption. The bone melters, the guard began, are nocturnal predators that hunt by thermal signature, Maya continued smoothly. Their preferred hunting temperature is between 285 and 295 Kelvin. Human body temperature is 310 Kelvin, which puts us outside their optimal range. They'll probably find us distasteful, assuming they bother with us at all. The transport shuddered as landing thrusters fired, fighting against the planet's crushing embrace. Through the viewports they could see the surface approaching, a landscape that looked like it had been carved by angry gods. Jagged crystal formations jutted from blood-red soil, while geysers of superheated steam erupted without warning. In the distance, something that might have been vegetation moved in patterns that suggested either wind or conscious intent. Even if you're right about the predators, Dr. Voss said quietly. The environmental challenges alone, Maya. The temperature differential between day and night is over 60 degrees. The electromagnetic storms will fry any technology we might have salvaged. The acid rain has a pH of 3.2, which is roughly equivalent to orange juice, Maya said. Corrosive to metals over time, but not immediately dangerous to organic tissue if we can fashion basic protective clothing. She paused, thinking. Actually, the electromagnetic activity could work in our favor. If we can construct basic Tesla coil arrays, we might be able to harvest power during storm events. The Vorthak guard's chittering had taken on a different quality. Less like laughter, more like the nervous clicking its species made when uncertain. You speak as if survival is possible, human child. Maya turned back to the viewport as the ground rushed up to meet them. Survival isn't the goal, she said softly. Any animal can survive if it's lucky enough. Humans don't just survive. We adapt. We overcome. We thrive. The landing was violent enough to rattle teeth, the transport's hull screaming in protest as it settled onto the alien soil. Through the thin walls they could hear the planet's voice. A constant symphony of wind, grinding stone, and sounds that defied easy classification. The atmospheric processors hummed to life, struggling to make the air outside breathable for the handful of species represented among the guards. As the magnetic locks on their restraints disengaged, Maya was the first to stand. She moved with careful deliberation, testing her balance against the crushing gravity. Around her, other prisoners struggled to remain upright, but she had clearly been practicing her movements economical and efficient. The Vorthak guard activated the ship's external cameras, projecting a view of the landing site onto the cabin's main screen. The landscape beyond looked like a vision of hell, twisted spires of rock reaching toward a sky that burned with perpetual aurora, while pools of steaming liquid reflected the chaos above. Behold your new home, humans, the guard chittered. The Galactic Council's mercy allows you to die slowly rather than face immediate execution. Use your remaining time to make peace with whatever gods your species worships. Maya studied the projection with the intensity of someone memorizing a map. She noted the wind patterns indicated by the movement of vapor, the way certain rock formations seemed to channel the flow of the acidic pools, the subtle color variations in the soil that might indicate mineral composition or pH levels. It'll do, she said finally, and began walking toward the exit ramp. Dr. Voss caught her arm. Maya, wait. We need to plan. We need to think about shelter. About the fact that we have approximately 4 hours before the day-night transition brings the temperature down to freezing, Maya said, not unkindly. And that the shuttle will lift off in 30 minutes regardless of whether we're ready. Planning is important, Dr. Voss, but right now we need to move. She gestured toward the projection. See that cluster of crystal formations about 200 meters northeast? The way they're arranged suggests natural wind breaks, and the mineral staining indicates geothermal activity underneath. If we can reach them and establish basic shelter before the temperature drops, we'll have time to plan properly. Captain Morrison looked from Maya to the hellscape outside and back again. In all his years of command, he'd never seen anyone approach certain death with such calm analysis. It was either inspiring or terrifying, possibly both. What do you need us to do? He asked. Maya smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had seen since their capture. Help me carry what we can from the shuttle. The guards probably won't stop us from taking basic supplies, and there should be emergency shelter materials in the cargo bay. She paused. Also, I need someone to help me catch one of those. She pointed to the screen, where small creatures darted between the crystal formations, things that looked like a cross between lizards and butterflies, their translucent wings catching the strange light. Catch them for what? Morrison asked. Food testing. They're native to this environment, which means they've evolved to process the local chemistry safely. If we can analyze their digestive systems, we can identify what's edible and what isn't. Plus, they're thriving here, which suggests there's a food chain we can tap into. The exit ramp began to lower with a pneumatic hiss, and the ship's atmosphere rushed out to meet the alien wind. The smell that wafted in was indescribable. Part ozone, part sulfur, part something organic and wild. Several prisoners gagged, but Maya breathed it in deeply, her expression thoughtful. Interesting, she murmured. The organic components suggest significant plant life, probably adapted to the chemical environment. That's good, means carbon-based nutrition sources. The Vorthak guard watched with growing unease as Maya walked calmly down the ramp, her fellow prisoners following with newfound determination. She moved like someone taking a stroll through a park rather than stepping onto a world designed to kill her. As her feet touched the alien soil, Maya knelt and scooped up a handful of the red dirt, examining it closely. She rubbed it between her fingers, brought it close to her nose, even touched it briefly to her tongue before spitting. Iron oxide base, high silicate content, trace sulfur compounds, she said to Dr. Social Voss, who had followed despite her obvious terror. The pH is actually more neutral than expected. We can work with this. Around them, the other prisoners began to spread out, following Maya's calm example. Captain Morrison coordinated the supply retrieval while Dr. Voss began examining the strange plant-like growths that clustered around the geothermal vents. The Vorthak guard remained at the top of the ramp, watching with growing amazement as the humans began not just surviving but actively engaging with their environment. When the shuttle's engines began their pre-flight sequence, it realized it had been holding its breath. Impossible, it chittered to itself as the ramp began to close. They are supposed to break. All species break on a Class-3. But as the shuttle lifted off, carrying the guard back to report to its superiors, Maya Chen stood in the center of the crystal formation she'd identified, directing her fellow prisoners in constructing their first shelter. She moved with purpose and confidence, her voice carrying clearly over the alien wind as she explained load-bearing principles adapted for the local gravity. And when the first electromagnetic storm of the day began building on the horizon, she actually smiled wider. Dr. Voss, she called out, gesturing toward the approaching wall of electrical fury. I think we're going to need to revise our power generation timeline. That storm looks perfect for our first energy harvesting test. As lightning began to dance between the crystal spires above them, Maya Chen began to laugh. Not the hysterical laughter of someone broken by impossible circumstances, but the delighted laughter of someone who had just realized that impossible was simply another word for interesting. The galaxy had sent humanity to die on Kepler 442c. But they had forgotten that humans had a very different definition of death than the rest of the universe. 3 weeks into their exile, the Galactic Council's monitoring drones detected something that caused panic in the chambers of 12 different species. The human settlement was growing. Maya Chen stood atop what had once been a barren crystal formation, now transformed into an observation platform overlooking a thriving compound. Below her, 42 of her fellow exiles worked with the focused intensity of people who had found purpose. The 43rd Lieutenant Commander James Wright had died on the second day, not from the planet's hostility, but from a heart condition that would have killed him anywhere. They had buried him beneath a cairn of the beautiful crystal formations, and Maya had spoken words about how his sacrifice had given them the mineral samples they needed to understand the local geology. Even in death, she had made him useful to the group's survival. Maya, you need to see this. Dr. Voss called from the biology lab. A cave system they had expanded and modified with tools jury-rigged from shuttle components. The xenobiologist emerged from the entrance, her face flushed with excitement despite the breathing apparatus they all wore during the midday heat cycles. Maya climbed down from her perch with the easy grace she had developed over weeks of adapting to the crushing gravity. The other prisoners, she had stopped thinking of them as prisoners after the first week, paused in their various tasks to follow. By now, they had learned that when Dr. Voss got excited, it usually meant good news for their long-term survival prospects. The cave lab was a marvel of human ingenuity. They had lined the walls with reflective materials salvaged from the shuttle to create natural lighting systems. Crude microscopes fashioned from scavenged optics allowed for detailed biological analysis. Most impressive was the hydroponic system Maya had designed. A complex network of crystal channels that filtered the local water through mineral beds, removing toxins while adding nutrients. Remember those butterfly lizard things you had us catching on the first day? Dr. Voss led them to a section where dozens of the creatures fluttered in makeshift enclosures. I've been studying their digestive systems like you suggested. She activated a display jury rigged from the shuttle's navigation system. Crude but functional diagrams showed the creature's anatomy in detail. They're not just surviving on the local plant life, they're thriving. Their gut bacteria breaks down sulfur compounds and converts them into usable nutrients. But here's the incredible part. Dr. Voss paused dramatically. A habit she had developed since Maya had convinced everyone that maintaining morale was as important as maintaining metabolism. I've isolated the bacterial cultures. With some modification, I think I can adapt them for human digestion. The implications hit Maya immediately, and her eyes lit up with possibilities. We could process local vegetation directly. No more rationing the shuttle's emergency rations. It gets better, Dr. Voss continued. The creature's excrement is incredibly rich in processed minerals. It's like they're little biological refineries, taking raw materials from the environment and converting them into pure, usable compounds. Captain Morrison, who had appointed himself as the group's logistics coordinator, frowned thoughtfully. You're talking about biological terraforming, using the native life to make the environment more human-compatible.
Exactly, Maya said, her mind already racing ahead to applications.
But not just terraforming. Enhancement. If we can scale this up. She was interrupted by a commotion from the compound's perimeter. Tommy Liu, a former engineer who had become their early warning system, came running in with news that made everyone freeze. Ship incoming, he gasped, pointing toward the chaotic sky. Big one. Council configuration. Maya's expression didn't change, but everyone who had come to know her recognized the subtle shift in her posture, the way she seemed to grow more focused, more dangerous.
How long?
20 minutes, maybe less. Tommy, get everyone to the deep caves. Morrison, initiate the concealment protocols. Maya's voice carried absolute authority despite her youth. Over the past 3 weeks, she had become their unofficial leader through a combination of competence, confidence, and an uncanny ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. What about you, Doctor? Voss asked. Maya smiled, that same unsettling smile that had worried the Vorthak guard on their first day. I'm going to greet our visitors. They've come a long way to check on us. The least I can do is be hospitable. 30 minutes later, the Galactic Council's inspection vessel settled onto the same landing site the prison transport had used. This ship was massive, a kilometer-long demonstration of the Council's technological superiority, bristling with sensors and weapons that could reduce the entire continent to glass. The delegation that emerged was equally impressive. 3 Vorthak warriors in full combat armor, followed by a hegemony mind reader whose psychic fields were visible as distortions in the air around its floating form. Behind them came the most dangerous member of the group, Ambassador Zethkar of the Dominion Fleet, whose species had personally overseen the extermination of 17 rebellious worlds. They expected to find bones scattered across the landscape, perhaps a few desperate survivors hiding in whatever inadequate shelter they had managed to construct before the environment claimed them. Instead, they found Maya Chen sitting cross-legged on a perfectly level platform of fused crystal, apparently meditating in the midst of an electromagnetic storm. Lightning crashed around her in patterns that seemed almost choreographed, each bolt striking carefully placed metallic rods that channeled the energy into hidden storage systems. She sat perfectly still as electricity danced overhead, her hair lifting gently in the charged air, completely relaxed despite the lethal forces swirling around her. Greetings, she said without opening her eyes as the delegation approached. I assume you're here for the scheduled inspection. You're 17 days early, but that's fine. We've been looking forward to showing off our progress. Ambassador Zethkar's vocal apparatus produced a sound like grinding stone. His species communicated through subsonic frequencies that could shatter bone, but the translation matrix rendered his words into harmless audio. Where are the others, human child? We detect only your life signature in this area. Maya opened her eyes and smiled with the serene confidence of someone sitting in her own garden, rather than on a world that should have killed her weeks ago.
Oh, they're around.
Probably working. We've been very busy lately. She gestured to the storm raging overhead. Perfect weather for energy collection. We'll have enough stored power to last through the next calm cycle. The hegemony mind reader floated closer, its psychic tendrils probing toward Maya's consciousness. What it found there made it recoil so violently that it nearly fell from its hovering position. Impossible, it broadcast directly into the minds of the other delegates. Her thoughts are structured, ordered. She shows no signs of psychological breakdown. If anything, she appears to be experiencing satisfaction, even happiness. Of course I'm happy, Maya said aloud, apparently having sensed the psychic communication. This is the most interesting challenge I've ever faced. Did you know that the electromagnetic field fluctuations here follow a modified Fibonacci sequence? We've been able to predict storm patterns with 93% accuracy. She stood gracefully, seemingly unaffected by the gravity that had the armored Vorthak struggling to maintain their footing. Would you like a tour? We've made some remarkable discoveries. Without waiting for an answer, she began walking toward the crystal formations. The delegation followed, partly from curiosity, and partly because the alternative was admitting that a human teenager was dictating the terms of their interaction. The mineral composition here is extraordinary, Maya continued as they walked, her voice carrying easily over the wind despite the storm. These crystals aren't just decorative. They're piezoelectric, natural energy converters. The entire formation is essentially a massive battery that recharges itself during electrical storms.
She led them to what appeared to be a smooth section of the crystal wall.
When she placed her palm against it, the surface shifted, revealing an entrance that had been completely invisible moments before. We've learned to work with the existing geological structures rather than against them, she explained as they entered a tunnel that glowed with soft natural light. The crystals conduct and store energy, but they also respond to specific bioelectric patterns. It took us about a week to figure out the resonance frequencies. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that left the delegation speechless. Where they had expected crude survival shelters, they found something that looked like a cross between a research facility and an art installation. The walls were lined with growing crystals that provided both structural support and ambient lighting. Terraced gardens filled with alien plants created natural air filtration systems. Water flowed through carved channels that followed mathematical patterns too complex to be accidental. And everywhere, humans worked with the focused intensity of people building something permanent. Dr. Voss is our xenobiology specialist, Maya said, indicating the woman who emerged from a side passage with her arms full of strange, beautiful plants. She's been cataloging the local ecosystem and identifying symbiotic opportunities. We've discovered that many of the native species can be modified to process atmospheric toxins, essentially cleaning the air as they grow. Dr. Voss nodded nervously to the delegation, but continued her work without pause. Around the chamber, other humans maintained the various systems that kept their underground city functioning. None of them looked like prisoners or exiles. They looked like colonists. This is illegal, Ambassador Zethkar declared, his subsonic voice making the crystal walls resonate ominously. You were sentenced to suffer and die on this world, not to establish unauthorized settlements. Maya's expression remained pleasant, but there was something dangerous in her eyes. I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were exiled to Kepler 442c as punishment for crimes against the Galactic Council. We were told we would die here. She spread her arms to indicate the thriving community around them. As you can see, we're not dead. The terms of our sentence have been fulfilled. The spirit of the sentence, the letter of the law is quite clear, Maya interrupted smoothly. We were to be transported to this world and left here. That has been done. There was no stipulation that we had to remain helpless or that we couldn't improve our situation using available resources. The hegemony mind reader tried again to penetrate Maya's thoughts, searching for deception or hidden plans. Again, it found only calm satisfaction and an intellect that seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. You planned this, it accused. Even before your transport arrived, you had prepared for this outcome. I hoped for it, Maya corrected. There's a difference. Hope requires you to work toward a positive outcome even when the odds are against you. Planning assumes you control variables that you might not actually control. She led them deeper into the complex, past chambers devoted to food cultivation, mineral processing, and what appeared to be a workshop where humans were crafting tools from salvaged materials and local resources. In one section, she showed them pools of carefully cultured bacteria that processed waste into fertilizer while generating useful byproducts. We're completely sustainable now, Maya explained with obvious pride. In fact, we're producing surplus resources. The bacterial cultures we've developed could revolutionize waste management on any world. The energy storage techniques could power settlements in areas where traditional methods aren't viable. Ambassador Zethkar's grinding voice carried a note that might have been uncertainty. You speak as if you intend to remain here permanently. Maya stopped walking and turned to face the delegation directly. For the first time since their arrival, her smile faded, replaced by an expression of absolute seriousness. Ambassador, with all due respect, where exactly did you think we would go? Earth is occupied by Council forces. Our ships are destroyed. Our colonies have been absorbed into your territories. Her voice remained level, but there was steel underneath the calm. This world is our home now. Not because we chose it, but because you forced it upon us. She gestured to the thriving community around them. But you made a critical error in your assumptions. You thought that humanity's relationship with hostile environments was one of submission, that if you made our circumstances harsh enough, we would break and die quietly. Maya began walking again, leading them toward what appeared to be the chamber's central hub. Instead, you gave us exactly what we needed, a challenge worthy of human ingenuity, a blank slate where we could build something new, resources that no one else wanted, so no one would compete with us for them. They emerged onto a natural balcony that overlooked an even larger chamber below. The delegation found themselves staring at something that redefined their understanding of what was possible on a Class-3 Deathworld. Below them stretched an underground ecosystem that somehow managed to be both alien and familiar. Terraced gardens created a cascading landscape of green and silver, where earth plants grew alongside modified native species. Streams of purified water flowed in complex patterns that generated their own energy through micro-hydroelectric systems. The air itself seemed to shimmer with health and vitality. And throughout it all, humans moved with the confidence of people who had found their place in the universe. You see, Ambassador, Maya said softly, you didn't send us here to die. You sent us here to evolve. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of children laughing, a sound that shouldn't have been possible on Kepler 442c, but which now echoed through chambers that humans had carved from living rock. When Ambassador Zethkar finally spoke, his subsonic voice carried a frequency that none of them had heard before, something that might have been fear. What do you want from the Council? Maya's smile returned, but it was different now. Sharper, more confident. The smile of someone who had just realized they held cards their opponents hadn't known existed. Nothing, she said. Absolutely nothing. You've already given us everything we need. 6 months after the Council's inspection, emergency sessions were being called across the galaxy. The topic was always the same: the human problem. Maya Chen, now 18 and bearing the informal title of Prime Coordinator of the Kepler colony, stood in the center of her greatest achievement. The original crystal formation had been transformed into something that defied every assumption about what was possible on a Deathworld. Towering spires of living crystal stretched toward the chaotic sky, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both art and communication networks. The underground city now housed over 200 humans. Dr. Voss emerged from the latest expansion tunnel, her face streaked with the peculiar dust that formed when human engineering met alien geology. The new arrivals are settling in well, she reported. The 15 from the Zephyr transport are already talking about establishing a sister colony in the southern hemisphere. Maya nodded absently, her attention focused on the holographic display that showed real-time data from across their growing civilization. Population growth, resource allocation, energy production, agricultural yield. Every metric painted the same picture. Not just survival, but explosive expansion. Have you given any thought to the Council's latest communication? Captain Morrison asked. He had aged considerably over the past months, but the lines in his face spoke of accomplishment rather than hardship. The communication in question had arrived via quantum relay 3 days earlier. It was formal, diplomatic, and utterly unprecedented in Council history. The galactic powers were requesting permission to establish trade relations with the Kepler colony. Maya's expression remained carefully neutral. Dr. Voss, what's the current status of our bacterial cultivation projects? Beyond anything I imagined possible, the xenobiologist replied with obvious excitement. The hybrid cultures we've developed can process virtually any organic waste into useful compounds. The applications for environmental restoration are limitless. Even more importantly, we've created strains that can break down the synthetic pollutants that most industrial civilizations struggle with. Energy storage? The crystal matrix networks are operating at 400% of projected capacity. Tommy's team has figured out how to grow targeted crystal formations that can store and release energy in patterns complex enough to run computational systems. We're essentially growing our own computers. Maya walked to one of the massive windows that looked out over the colony's surface. Installations, what had once been a barren hellscape, now bloomed with carefully engineered life. Plants that glowed with their own internal light created a landscape that was both beautiful and functional. The air itself was cleaner than it had been when they arrived, processed by living filters that turned toxins into nutrients. And the mineral extraction operations? That's the really interesting part, Morrison said, consulting his tablet. The mining teams have discovered that this planet is rich in elements that are incredibly rare elsewhere in the galaxy. Crystallized quantum materials, heavy metals with properties we didn't even know existed, biological compounds with applications we're still discovering. In other words, Maya said quietly, we're sitting on resources worth more than most star systems. The implications hung in the air like a gathering storm. When the Council had exiled them here, they had expected the humans to die quietly on a worthless rock. Instead, they had inadvertently given them control of what might be the most valuable real estate in the galaxy. Tommy Lou's voice crackled through the comm system. Maya, you need to get to the observation deck. Now. The urgency in his tone had Maya moving before he finished speaking. She took the crystal elevator to the highest point of the colony, a platform that extended above the surface and provided a clear view of the surrounding landscape. What she saw made her smile wider than she had in months. The horizon was filled with ships. Not just council vessels, but representatives from dozens of species, each flying under diplomatic flags that signaled peaceful intent. The great powers of the galaxy had come calling, and they had come as supplicants, rather than conquerors. 57 vessels at last count, Tommy reported, his excitement barely contained. Everything from Dominion fleet cruisers to hegemony science ships. Even the Zephyrians sent a delegation, and they haven't left their home system in 3 centuries. Maya activated the colony's external communication array, a network of crystal resonators that could transmit across interstellar distances without relying on Council infrastructure. This is Prime Coordinator Chen of the Kepler colony to all approaching vessels. You are welcome in our space, but be advised that we have established territorial boundaries extending to the third moon. Any vessel crossing that boundary without explicit permission will be considered hostile. The response came immediately from the lead Council ship. Prime Coordinator Chen, this is Ambassador Zethkar. We request permission to land and discuss matters of mutual benefit. Granted, Ambassador. Transmitting landing coordinates now. Maya's fingers danced across the crystal control interfaces with practiced ease. Please note that our atmospheric standards have been modified for optimal human health. Your environmental suits may require adjustment. There was a pause that spoke of hasty consultations. Modified how? We've increased oxygen content by 12% and reduced sulfur compounds by 60%. The electromagnetic field fluctuations have been stabilized through our crystal network array. Atmospheric pressure has been reduced to 1.3 times Earth standard through selective terraforming. Maya's voice carried the casual tone of someone discussing minor home improvements. You've terraformed an entire planet? The shock in the ambassador's voice was evident even through the translation matrix. Not terraformed, Maya corrected. Enhanced. We've preserved the native ecosystem while making it more compatible with human needs. The result is a world that's actually more biologically diverse than when we arrived. An hour later, Maya stood in the colony's primary conference chamber, a space carved from living crystal that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Representatives from 12 different galactic powers sat around a table that had been grown rather than built, its surface displaying real-time data about every aspect of the colony's operations. The numbers spoke for themselves. Food production that exceeded consumption by 300%. Energy generation that could power a small fleet. Manufacturing capabilities that produced goods of higher quality than most industrial worlds. And underneath it all, the growing certainty that Kepler 442c might be the key to solving problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Ambassador Zethkar spoke first, his subsonic voice carefully modulated to avoid causing structural damage to the delicate crystal formations. Prime Coordinator, the Council acknowledges that our initial assessment of the situation may have been incomplete. Maya's expression remained politely attentive. Around the table, alien dignitaries shifted nervously as they tried to find diplomatic ways to address the elephant in the room. They had intended to commit genocide and had instead created a technological powerhouse. We are prepared to offer full recognition of Kepler Colony as an independent state, along with favorable trade agreements and technological exchange programs, continued the Vorthak diplomat who had replaced Zethkar as the Council's primary negotiator. That's very generous, Maya replied. What would you want in return? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Everyone at the table knew the answer, but none of them wanted to be the first to say it. Finally, the hegemony representative spoke through its psychic interface. We require access to your biological and technological innovations. The bacterial cultures alone could solve the pollution crises on 300 worlds. Your crystal growing techniques could revolutionize construction and computing. Your terraforming methods could make marginal worlds habitable. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Voss, what's your assessment of our current research projects? The xenobiologist consulted her notes. We have 47 distinct biological innovations ready for implementation, 32 crystalline technologies with immediate applications, and at least a dozen terraforming techniques that could be adapted for various planetary types. She paused. And that's just what we've completed. Our development pipeline has hundreds of additional projects. I see. Maya turned back to the assembled delegates.
And what exactly are you offering in exchange for technologies worth? How much would you say, Captain Morrison? Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Conservatively?
The bacterial cultures alone are worth more than the GDP of most star systems. The crystal tech could revolutionize manufacturing across the galaxy. The terraforming applications, he shrugged. Priceless doesn't begin to cover it. The silence that followed was deafening. Every being at the table was doing the same calculation, and they all arrived at the same terrifying conclusion. Humanity now controlled technologies that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Maya stood and walked to the chamber's great window, looking out over the thriving civilization that had grown from the ashes of exile.
You know what the really interesting thing is, she said softly. None of this was planned.
We didn't come here intending to build a galactic power base or develop world-changing technologies. She turned back to face the delegates and for the first time since their arrival, allowed her true feelings to show. The careful diplomacy fell away, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. We came here because you tried to kill us. You sentenced us to death on a world you believed would break us, destroy us, make us disappear so you wouldn't have to think about what you'd done to our species. Her voice remained level, but there was ice in her words. You wanted us to suffer and die quietly so you could tell yourselves that humanity was just another failed civilization that couldn't adapt to the realities of galactic politics. The assembled delegates shifted uncomfortably as Maya continued. Instead, you gave us exactly what we needed to become something you never expected. You gave us a challenge worthy of human ingenuity. You gave us resources that no one else wanted. You gave us the freedom to build something new without interference from established powers. She gestured toward the window and the thriving world beyond. You tried to exile us to hell and we turned it into paradise. You tried to break us and we became stronger. You tried to erase us and we became indispensable. Maya returned to the table and looked each delegate in the eye. So, when you sit there offering us favorable trade agreements and technological exchanges, remember that you're not negotiating with prisoners or exiles. You're negotiating with the people who took your worst punishment and made it into our greatest advantage. Ambassador Zethkar's grinding voice carried notes of something that might have been respect. What are your terms? Maya's smile returned, but it was different now. The smile of someone who had learned to play a game where the stakes were measured in star systems. First, full recognition of human sovereignty over this system, and any others we choose to settle. Second, reparations for the destruction of Earth and our colonies, to be paid in the form of manufacturing rights and resource access. Third, guaranteed non-interference in our internal affairs. The demands sent shockwaves around the table. Recognition was one thing, but reparations implied that humanity was now powerful enough to demand compensation for war crimes. And the manufacturing rights Maya was proposing would give humans access to industrial infrastructure across the galaxy. Those terms are extensive, the Vorthak negotiator said carefully. They're fair, Maya replied. You destroyed our civilization and tried to murder our entire species. In return, we're offering technologies that could solve the galaxy's greatest problems. I'd say that's remarkably generous of us. Dr. Voss stepped forward with a data tablet. If it helps your deliberations, we've prepared a demonstration of what human-enhanced bacterial cultures can accomplish. She activated the display, showing before and after images of polluted worlds transformed into gardens. The hegemony's industrial worlds could be completely cleaned within 2 years. The Dominion's mining planets could become habitable again. Even the radiation zones from the old wars could be made safe. The implications were staggering. Environmental restoration on that scale could add trillions of beings to the galactic population while opening up previously uninhabitable territory for expansion. We'll need time to consider, began one of the smaller delegation members. Of course, Maya said graciously. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, I should mention that we've been in communication with several other human survivor groups.
Apparently, exile to Deathworlds has become something of a trend among council members. The delegates exchanged glances that spoke of hasty intelligence briefings and growing panic.
If humans could transform one Class-3 Deathworld into a technological powerhouse, what could they accomplish with multiple worlds and a growing population? Maya activated the chamber's holographic display showing a star map with highlighted systems.
The Rigel survivors have established themselves quite successfully on Kepler 438b. The refugees from the Vega colonies have done remarkable things with the asteroid field in the Proxima system, and the groups exiled to the gas giant moons. She shrugged modestly.
Well, let's just say that zero-gravity manufacturing has some interesting advantages. The horror on the delegates' faces was almost comical as they realized the scope of their miscalculation. They had scattered human survivors across the galaxy, expecting them to die quietly.
Instead, they had inadvertently created a network of human settlements, developing technologies in isolation, free from the constraints and expectations of galactic civilization. How many? Ambassador Zethkar asked quietly.
Worlds with human populations? At last count, 47. Most of them are what you would call marginal or hostile environments. Maya's smile was razor-sharp.
As it turns out, humans have a remarkable talent for making marginal environments quite profitable. The negotiations continued for 3 days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. When faced with a growing human civilization that controlled technologies essential for galactic prosperity, the Council had few choices.
They could try to take what they wanted by force, but that would mean war against an enemy that had already proven capable of thriving under impossible conditions. They could try to isolate humanity, but that would mean giving up access to innovations that could solve centuries-old problems.
Or they could accept that the galaxy had a new major power, one that had earned its place through human stubbornness, ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. On the final day, Maya stood once again on the observation deck, watching as the delegations prepared to depart.
Each ship carried copies of the agreements that would reshape galactic politics, recognition of human sovereignty, reparations packages that would fund human expansion for generations, and technology-sharing agreements that would spread human innovations throughout known space.
Dr. Voss joined her at the railing, looking out over a world that had been transformed from a death sentence into the foundation of a new civilization. Do you think they'll honor the agreements? Maya's laugh carried the confidence of someone who had learned to see opportunity in every challenge.
They'll honor them because they have to. We're not the same species that lost the war, Sarah. We're what humanity becomes when you try to break us and fail. She gestured toward the thriving colony below where humans worked alongside the aliens, who had chosen to stay and learn from the miracle of Kepler 442c. They wanted to exile us to hell. Instead, they gave us the chance to build heaven, and now they want to buy their way in.
As the last of the diplomatic ships disappeared into hyperspace, Maya Chen looked up at the alien stars that had become home and began planning humanity's next impossible dream. The galaxy had tried to destroy them and had only made them stronger.
Now it was time to show the universe what humans could really accomplish when they stopped being grateful for survival and started demanding their place among the stars. The girl who had smiled at a Class-3
Deathworld had become the woman who would reshape the galaxy. And she was just getting started.
Class-3 Deathworld was meant to break them. The human girl just smiled. HFY.